when the heat reached 100 degrees and Stony Creek ran completely dry for the first time in 20 years. David had just turned 30 that week. He'd worked as a forest ranger in the western region of Glacier National Park for 7 years. And he knew every trail, every bend of water, every spot where the deer came down to drink at dusk. That afternoon, he was making his routine rounds when he saw claw marks on an aspen bark. Recent, too deep. He followed the trail 400 yards downhill until he reached the dry creek bed, and that's where he saw him. The bear was lying on his side, his belly rising and falling with effort, surrounded by wild fruit peels and pieces of roots he could reach without moving. His hind legs were stretched out at an odd angle, dead, useless. David stood 15 yards away, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt, but without pressing the button. The animal lifted its head, slow, tired, and stared at him. There was no aggression in that gaze. There was only a kind of ancient resignation, the quiet acceptance of someone who had already given up fighting. David returned to base and called the Forestry Service veterinarian. She arrived 2 hours later with a tranquilizer rifle and a first aid kit. Dr. Helen Cortez was in her early 50s with 30 years of wildlife experience. She examined the bear from a distance using binoculars and then approached slowly, the syringe already prepared. The shot was clean. 15 minutes later, the bear slept deeply, and Helen could touch his spine with her hands. She felt the lumbar vertebrae, pressed, tested reflexes. When she finished, she wiped her hands on a cloth and looked at David with an expression he knew well. "Old injury," she said. "Probably a fall from a cliff or hit by a car on the highway over a year ago. The vertebrae fused crooked, compressing the spinal cord. There's no surgery for this, not on a wild animal this size. The protocol, David knew, was euthanasia. A clean shot, merciful." Helen prepared the syringe with the lethal cocktail, but hesitated. She looked at the bear, at the chest that rose and fell, at the claws still sharp, at the thick fur that gleamed under the afternoon sun. "How long has he been living like this?" she asked, more to herself than to David. "A year, maybe more. Surviving on fallen fruit and rainwater in the rocks, that's either stubbornness or a miracle." David couldn't answer. He just said quietly, "Give me a week." Helen looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "A week for what?" "To try," David answered. "I don't know. Just try." She sighed deeply, put away the syringe and left without saying anything more. But she left some anti-inflammatory medication and a bag of saline, a gesture that said, without words, "Do what you think you must." David spent the entire night awake, sketching on notebook pages. He wasn't an engineer. He'd barely finished his biology degree, but he'd grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, and he knew how to suspend hay bales, how to make a horse with a broken leg support itself in harnesses. Maybe, just maybe, that could work. The next morning, he drove to a hardware store in Kalispell and bought steel cables, industrial pulleys, treated pine boards, heavy-duty nylon cargo straps. He spent $1,200 out of his own pocket. It took 3 days to build the structure, an inverted A-frame, solid enough to support the bear's weight. The straps passed under the chest and belly, connected to the pulleys, allowing him to adjust the height. The idea was simple and absurd at the same time. Keep the bear standing, with his hind paws touching the ground, forcing the muscles to remember what it was to carry weight. Primitive physical therapy. Helen came back on the 4th day, saw the finished structure, shook her head and said only, "This is crazy, David." But she helped sedate the bear again and place him in the straps. When the animal woke up, suspended, his hind paws barely touching the earth, he roared, a deep sound of panic and fury. David stayed 5 yards away, his heart racing, ready to cut the ropes if the bear went into despair. But after 10 minutes, the bear stopped thrashing. He just stood there, breathing deeply, head lowered, front paws planted on the ground. And then, slowly, very slowly, he tried to push his hind paws against the earth. The first 30 days were the hardest. David hiked up the trail every day before dawn, bringing fresh water and fruit. He adjusted the straps, tightened or loosened the pulleys, depending on how the bear reacted. There were days when the animal just hung there, inert, as if he'd given up. There were days when he growled, irritated, and David had to back away. But there were also those rare, precious days when he saw the hind legs move, small spasms, involuntary contractions, signs that something deep in the damaged nerves still responded. In the second month, the bear began to bear weight. Not much, maybe 10-20 pounds on each paw, but it was something. David started spending more time in the clearing, sometimes hours, just watching. He brought a folding stool and sat there in silence, while the bear tested his own limits. There was no hurry, there was no audience, there was no one to impress. It was just a man and an animal, sharing the same incomprehensible stubbornness. It was in the third month that doubt hit hard. David was sitting in front of the bear, his head in his hands, exhausted. He'd lost weight, his beard growing unkempt, and the park supervisor had already given him 3 warnings for neglecting other duties. Helen showed up that afternoon, unannounced, and sat down beside him. She stayed silent for a while, just looking at the bear, who could now stand on his own for almost 20 seconds before his legs gave out. "He's improving," David said quietly, trying to convince himself. Helen nodded slowly. "He is. But what about after? After he walks? If he walks, what are you going to do? Release him? Will he survive out there alone?" David had no answer. He didn't know. But he continued, because stopping meant accepting that those 5 months had been useless. And he couldn't accept that. In the 4th month, the bear took 3 steps on his own, without the straps. It was on a foggy morning when David was adjusting the structure. He didn't even notice right away. When he looked back, the bear was 6 feet away, standing, his body trembling but upright. David froze. He didn't dare move. The bear stared at him, took a step, then another, and on the third, the hind legs failed and he fell on his side with a heavy thud. But it had been real. 3 steps. 3 damn steps. From there, it was as if something had unlocked. Each week the bear could walk farther, 5 steps, 10, 20. In the 5th month, he walked to the edge of the clearing and back, a distance of almost 130 feet. The hind legs still dragged a little, the hips swayed, but he walked. And David, for the first time in months, allowed himself to believe this wasn't madness. It was at the end of September, exactly 5 months and 11 days after that first encounter at the dry creek, that David made the decision to remove the straps for the last time. The bear was stronger, more alert. He'd gained 30 pounds back. His eyes no longer had that dim resignation. They had hunger for space, for movement, for forest. And now, standing there in that clearing, bathed in morning sun, David watched the impossible happen. The bear took 1 step at a time, slow, awkward, but steady. 10 steps, 15, 20. He stopped at the edge of shadow, where the pines began to swallow the light, and turned his head back. David didn't know what to expect. Part of him thought the bear would simply disappear uphill without looking back. But the animal turned around, walked back, slow, deliberate. And when he was less than 6 feet away, he lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against David's chest. The contact lasted maybe 5 seconds. The coarse fur, the heat of the giant body, the deep breathing that made David's chest rise and fall with it. There were no words for that. There was no science. It was just recognition, gratitude, farewell. Then the bear pulled away, turned, and began walking back to the forest. His hind legs still wavered, but he didn't stop. He climbed the slope slowly, pausing now and then to scent the air, and disappeared among the trees without looking back. David stood there for a long time, after the bear vanished. The clearing was silent, only the wind in the canopy and the distant call of a bird. He looked at the structure of wood and cables, now empty, swaying gently in the breeze. He didn't know if the bear would survive out there. He didn't know if those 5 months had been sensible or insane. But he knew he'd done the only thing he could do. He'd given a chance, and sometimes perhaps a chance is all life asks of us.